So behind me, I've got my newest project. It's a big cabinet display case. It's 44 inches wide by 7 feet 3 inches tall. So it's really big, and I'm actually making 3 of them, and they're going to go together to make a huge bookshelf display case for the client's house. Now, cabinetry like this is difficult even at the best of times, but this one's even harder than usual because it's so big. I haven't had much trouble cutting the components, that's gone pretty well, but now I'm getting to the glue-up stage, and I've got a big problem. This piece is so big, it's actually bigger than my assembly table. And my assembly table's not that small. It's overhanging on the side by 5 or 6 inches, and that's really tricky, because if I don't have a stable surface to put it on, and if it doesn't fit on my table, how the hell am I going to clamp it up? The first thing I thought of was just making the table bigger. I've got some full sheets of MDF up in my garage, and I could put a full sheet on top of this. That would give me all the width I need and some more length. The only problem is, I like this table the way it is. I don't have the biggest shop in the world, and this table's already big enough for most things I want to do. I really don't feel like giving up the space, and I don't feel like wasting an entire sheet of MDF just making a table bigger when I don't even want it bigger in the first place. So I need a better solution. I'm going to start by pulling out a couple of 2x4s and cutting off lengths that are a little bit wider than my table. Now I need them to be really flat and square, so I'm going to joint them on the table saw and make sure I've got good edges. So now I've got 4 flat, even beams, and they're going to span the table and bring the whole thing up a little bit so that I can get clamps underneath the case. But I've got a couple other problems I need to sort out too. I'm going to be putting a back on these cabinets of 1/2 inch plywood. And so I've cut these middle 2 shelves a 1/2 inch short to allow for the back to go in. You can see right here, they're falling a 1/2 inch shy of the end of this dado because there's nothing to support them and bring them up so that they're flush. So I need to modify 2 of my supports so that they push these shelves up to be flush with the edges of the case. This is one of those times where being a hoarder is actually kind of a good thing. I have a lot of scraps of veneer plywood sitting around, like this walnut plywood. Now, it's small and kind of oddly shaped, and I probably should have thrown it away, but I kept it because walnut plywood's expensive. And it's a good thing that I did, because it's the exact same thickness as the back that I'm going to put on my cabinet. So I'm going to rip some strips off of this and glue them to the top of 2 of my supports, and they're going to bump those shelves up to the flush edge of the dado. Okay, well that's what I planned to do, but it didn't quite work out that way. Let me show you why. My original plan was that these strips were going to sit on top of my 2x4s just like this, bump the shelf up in the dado, and make it flush with the top of the case. But I need the clamps to go right where the shelves are, so the shelves are snug into the dados and the case sides. If I make these strips just like this, and then the shelf is sitting on top of it, well, I need the clamp to go underneath the shelf. Where's the clamp going to go? Okay, now I have these new spacers made, and they overhang the sides of my 2x4s by a good 2 inches. So the support will go under the case, the shelf will sit on the overhang right here, just like this, and then there's plenty of room underneath for the clamp to go. So now my support won't be in the way of my clamp, and I'll be able to put the clamping force against the shelf to get it snug into the dado. Now with this overhanging support screwed to the center, that shelf is going to be bumped up to the edge of the case where it needs to be, but the sides of the case will be able to sit down against the 2x4, and there's plenty of room for my clamp to be underneath and clamp each side of the shelf and pull it into the case. So this setup is perfect, but I realized I have another problem. The top and bottom shelves need to be flush with the bottom of the case, so I wouldn't add a spacer to them. The only problem is, I still have the same problem with the clamp not being able to be right underneath because the support will block it. So I need overhangs like this on my other 2 supports, but they can't stick up like this. They've got to be flush. So I've got to make a lap joint in the edge of the 2x4 here and inset a piece of ply like this so that I have a shelf for my clamp to fit underneath, but it's flat along the top and doesn't push the shelf upward. Okay, now the top and bottom are sorted out. The side of the case will sit up on the support like this. This top shelf will sit on the extensions I made, just like this. And then there's plenty of room underneath for my clamp to go under and clamp right at the edge where I want the force to be. Okay, next problem. I can get my clamps near the front edge and the back edge of the shelf, and they're going to give good pressure. But if I've only got the clamps here and down here, that force might bow the case side and keep the shelf from seating all the way in the dado. So even though I'm going to have good clamping pressure only at the edges of the shelf, I need some way to distribute that pressure also to the middle in here so that everything lines up right. What I'm going to do is make a clamping caul with a little bit of a bow built into it. I take a piece of 2x4, rip it, and then plane a really slight curvature into it. And that way, when I clamp it to the side of the case, that bow is going to concentrate the force in the middle of the shelf. And as the piece of wood bends under clamping pressure, it's going to distribute the force evenly along the entire case side. Here's one of the clamping cauls that I just planed that taper in. And when I have it against the table like this, it actually looks like the bottom is totally flat. So let me show you what's going on here. If I put a clamp on one side, all of a sudden you can see how this side rises up. That's the taper offsetting the caul. Now, if I put a clamp on the other side, it actually doesn't take very much pressure to bring that piece of wood down flat. And now what's going on here is I have the pressure of the clamps on the edges, but that taper and the thick part of the wood in the middle here is also putting a lot of pressure in the center. So whatever shelf I clamp this against is going to get pulled into the case side really tightly. So by now you're thinking, wow, that was a lot of prep work. Are you going to get on with just clamping this thing now? And the answer is no, not yet. Because with a case this big, the other thing I'm worried about is keeping it square. The sides are going to stay parallel and the top and the bottom are going to stay parallel, but it'd be really easy for it to shift one way or the other. And if you did it that way and didn't notice and the glue dried, the piece would be ruined. So I need some clamping aids that I'm going to be able to put at the corners that are going to allow me to make sure it's perfectly square once I get the glue on and the clamps on. So let me make those real quick. It's a jet, right? Okay, I've spent about 6 hours over the course of 2 days making supports, cauls, and clamping squares. Now I'm actually ready to clamp this thing together. I'm going to start by centering it on the table end to end, which in this case means pushing it forward a little bit. Now I'm going to use the clamping squares that I just made to get the shelves pretty much square, like that. That's about right. Now I'm going to mark the location of each shelf directly on the table. I'm using a ballpoint pen for this. If I used a pencil, I wouldn't be able to see the lines, and if I used a Sharpie, the ink would bleed into the wood. So this is the only thing that's really going to work for this situation. I want to get all the shelf locations marked on the table, and then I'm going to take the cabinet off and set up all my glue supports. So I need to know where the shelves are so I can put the supports in the right place. Now I'm going to clear all of this stuff off the table, use the layout lines that I just drew on the table to place the supports, and then put everything back on the supports and get ready to dry clamp it. Now the table's clear and I've got my clamping supports set up. I've also screwed them down to the tabletop because they're not very stable, and while I'm trying to get this thing together, it would be awful to have these things falling over on me. And then I've also added this cleat on the far side over here, and the idea with that is that, wait, let me grab a little scrap here to demonstrate with, hold on. So imagine this little scrap of plywood here is the big long case side. I should be able to slide it over here and butt it up against that and then stand it up without too much difficulty. This case is huge and I'm handling it totally by myself, so I have to add little things here and there to make it possible to handle these big pieces without a second pair of hands. Okay, I think I'm ready to actually get the case together. Let's give that a shot. Now I've got the whole thing clamped up for the first time, and I'm seeing the case come together, and it's pretty good. It's what I was looking for. Still got problems that I need to deal with. This shelf isn't sitting in its dado very well. There's a gap there, so I've got to clamp that in a little bit better. This shelf over here, I don't know if you can see it there. See, it's not quite reaching the edge of the case. It's sitting a little bit too far down, which is weird because I measured very carefully and it's bumped up on a little spacer that should be moving it up far enough. Maybe the spacer, hold on, that's a good idea. Maybe the spacer down here is bending under the weight of the shelf, and so it's not up as high as it should be. It's like 1/8 of an inch, but I need to get that sorted out. And this joint over here, this isn't very well lined up, and I used one of these squares just to hold things together, but it's also not sitting perfectly square. This one's close. It's almost there. It's a little gappy down in this corner here. There's a little bit of a gap there. I know it's not much, but I want this as close to perfect as I can get it. So this is looking pretty good. It's not perfect, but I'm going to keep working on it. See, here's a problem right here. This joint isn't together. There we go. Okay, that should help things. So now I'm just going to travel around the whole thing troubleshooting and figure out what these problems are, and we'll go from there. Alright, so this is what I was working towards all day. I've got the whole thing up on the clamping supports, which allows me to get the bar clamps underneath it, and then up on top I have my clamping squares in the corners with a bunch of bar clamps on them, which is pulling the thing into square. All the shelves are seated in the dados, and when I put a framing square on any part of it, it all comes out straight and true and looking good. So I think this is it. This is the way I want to glue it up. I don't have time to glue it up right now, and I really want to cut the components for the other pieces so that I can glue them all up in quick succession. So if you were waiting for that part, I'm sorry, but I can't do that right now. But you should follow me on Instagram, because I have pictures of everything that I do, and you'll definitely be seeing this process. I did this video because I was getting ready to do this glue up, and I searched YouTube for any videos about how to glue up big cabinets, and I couldn't find any. And so it seemed like a good thing to make a video about. If you're doing a big project like this and you're struggling to get the clamps on it, maybe this video will help you out a little bit. Anyway, thanks for watching.